She looked me straight in the eyes, my own daughter, and said, "Mother, we sold your house, the one Dad built for you. We needed the money, and you weren't using it anyway." I stood there in the middle of my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. My fingers went numb, the ceramic slipped. It shattered against the floor, and neither of us moved to clean it. That sound, that breaking, became the soundtrack of everything that followed. Let me tell you how we got here. Let me tell you who I really am and who my daughter Vivian became without me noticing. My name is Scarlett Ashworth. I am 68 years old, and until that Tuesday morning in April, I believed I understood my life. I believed I understood my children. I believed that 43 years of marriage, 40 years of motherhood, and 35 years of running a small but successful accounting firm had taught me something about people, about loyalty, about the weight of promises spoken in the dark hours of hospital rooms and at kitchen tables covered in bills we couldn't pay. I was wrong. Not about everything, but about the things that mattered most. My husband Theodore, everyone called him Teddy, built me that house in 1989. It wasn't grand. It was a 3-bedroom cottage on 2 acres in Vermont, near the lake where we had spent our honeymoon 30 years before that. He built it with his own hands, working weekends and vacations for 3 years straight. I still remember the sawdust in his hair when he would come home Sunday evenings, exhausted but smiling, smelling of pine and varnish and sweat. He built it because I had told him once, just once, that I dreamed of retiring somewhere quiet, somewhere with trees and water and the sound of nothing but birds. He listened, he remembered, and he spent 3 years of his life turning my whispered dream into wood and stone and glass. When he died 7 years ago, I couldn't go there anymore. The grief was too fresh, too raw, like an open wound that wouldn't close. So I stayed in our house in Boston, surrounded by his books and his coffee cups and the dent in his pillow that I couldn't bring myself to fluff out. I thought about selling the Vermont house many times, but every time I picked up the phone to call a realtor, something stopped me. Some voice in my chest that sounded like Teddy saying, "Not yet, Cordy, not yet." I didn't know my children were listening to a different voice entirely. Vivian is my oldest. She's 42 now, married to a man named Douglas who works in pharmaceutical sales. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, Penelope, who is 14, and Theodore Jr., who is 11, named after his grandfather. For years, I thought Vivian and I were close. We talked on the phone every Sunday evening. She sent photos of the children's school events. She remembered my birthday, my anniversary, the anniversary of Teddy's death. She seemed like a good daughter, a devoted daughter. I realize now that I was seeing what I wanted to see, not what was actually there. My son Nathaniel is 39. He never married. He moves from job to job, city to city, always chasing something he can never quite name. I used to worry about him constantly, sending money when he asked, which was often, and sometimes when he didn't ask, which was more often. I thought I was helping. I thought that's what mothers did. I was writing checks to a phantom, feeding a hunger that had nothing to do with food or rent or genuine need. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that kitchen, to the coffee spreading across my white tile floor like a slow-motion bloodstain, to my daughter's face which showed no remorse, no guilt, only a kind of tired irritation, as if I were a child who had dropped her ice cream and was about to make a scene. "Mother, please don't be dramatic," Vivian said, stepping over the broken ceramic to reach for a paper towel. The house was sitting empty. You haven't visited in 7 years. The taxes alone were costing you almost $8,000 a year. We did you a favor. A favor. She used that word, a favor, as if selling the last piece of my husband that still existed in this world, the house he built with his hands that I had held for 43 years. the house that contained every dream we ever shared about growing old together, was equivalent to picking up my dry cleaning or watering my plants when I went on vacation. You had no right, I heard myself say, and my voice sounded strange, like it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere far away, somewhere underwater. That house was in my name. Teddy put it in my name. How did you even— Power of attorney, Vivian said calmly, wiping up the coffee with efficient strokes. You signed it 3 years ago, remember? After your hip surgery? You said you wanted us to be able to handle things if you became incapacitated. I did remember signing something. I remembered Vivian sitting at my hospital bedside, her hand warm on mine, her voice soft and concerned. Just in case, Mother. Just in case something happens. We want to be able to take care of you. I remembered the pen feeling heavy in my hand, the morphine making everything fuzzy and dreamlike. I remembered trusting her. I wasn't incapacitated, I said. I had a hip replacement. I was walking again in 6 weeks. Well, you never revoked it. Vivian stood up, dropped the wet paper towels in the trash, and finally looked at me. Really looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw something I had never noticed before. Something cold, something calculating, something that had been there all along, hiding behind birthday cards and Sunday phone calls and photos of my grandchildren. The house sold for $412,000. After closing costs and the realtor's commission, we cleared $370,000. Nathaniel and I split it. We each got $185,000. Before you continue, if you've ever discovered a truth too late, if you've ever looked into the eyes of someone you love and seen a stranger staring back, make sure you're subscribed. Some stories only those who have lived them truly understand. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. My mind was doing calculations, the way it always did. The accountant in me unable to stop working, even as my heart was breaking into pieces too small to count. $370,000, split 2 ways. My children had stolen nearly $400,000 from me, and they had done it legally, using a document I had signed while drugged and frightened and trusting. "Where is Nathaniel?" I asked, and my voice was steadier now, colder. Something was happening inside me, some kind of transformation I didn't yet understand. The grief and shock were still there, but they were being joined by something else, something older and harder, something that had been sleeping in my bones since childhood, since the years when my father drank and my mother pretended everything was fine, and I learned to survive by watching, waiting, and never letting anyone see what I was really thinking. "He's in San Diego," Vivian said. "He used his share to start a business, some kind of tech thing. I don't really understand it." "And your share?" Vivian hesitated. It was the first crack I had seen in her composure, and I filed it away for later examination. Douglas and I needed to pay off some debt. Credit cards. The house needed a new roof. Penelope's private school tuition went up again this year. "Credit card debt," I repeated. "How much credit card debt?" "Mother, that's not really— How much?" Another hesitation, then quietly, $93,000. I felt something shift inside me again. $93,000 in credit card debt. My daughter, who drove a Mercedes and lived in a 4-bedroom colonial and took her family to Europe every summer, had been drowning in debt this whole time. And instead of telling me, instead of asking for help, instead of having an honest conversation about money the way I had raised her to do, she had stolen from me. She had sold my dead husband's last gift to me without even asking. She had used my love and my trust as weapons against me. "Get out," I said. Vivian blinked. "What?" "Get out of my house. Now." "Mother, you're overreacting. Let's sit down and talk about this like adults." "I am talking like an adult," I said. And now my voice was the voice I used to use in business meetings. the voice that had made grown men twice my size sit up straight and pay attention. The voice that had built a firm from nothing and kept it running for 35 years through recessions and scandals and the death of my partner. You stole from me. You and your brother conspired to sell property that was not yours to sell. You used a power of attorney that was meant for emergencies to commit what I'm fairly certain is a crime. And now you're standing in my kitchen telling me I'm overreacting. So let me be very clear, Vivian Elizabeth Ashworth Peterson. You have 30 seconds to leave my home, or I will call the police. You wouldn't. 25 seconds. Vivian stared at me. I stared back. Something in my face must have told her I was serious, because she grabbed her purse from the counter and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. You know what, Mother? You've always been like this. Cold, controlling. Everything has to be exactly the way you want it. Maybe that's why Dad spent so much time in Vermont. Maybe he was building that house to get away from you. The door slammed behind her. I stood in my kitchen, alone, surrounded by broken ceramic and cold coffee, and the echo of words that cut deeper than any knife. And I realized, standing there in the silence, that I had been wrong about so many things. Wrong about my daughter, wrong about my son, wrong about the life I thought I had built. But I was not wrong about one thing. I was not going to let them get away with this. That evening, I sat in Teddy's chair in the living room, the one that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco, even after 7 years, and I thought. I thought about Vivian's face when she told me about the house. So casual, so dismissive, as if my pain was an inconvenience she hadn't anticipated and now had to manage. I thought about Nathaniel in San Diego, spending his share of my stolen property on some venture that would probably fail within a year, the way all his ventures failed. I thought about my grandchildren, Penelope and Theodore Jr., who I loved with an intensity that frightened me sometimes, and who were being raised by people who thought theft was acceptable as long as it stayed in the family. I thought about Teddy, about the way he would come home from Vermont on those Sunday evenings, sawdust in his hair, plans spread across the kitchen table, pointing at rooms that didn't exist yet and telling me what they would look like. This is where you'll sit to read, he would say, tracing a window with his finger. Morning light, you'll see the lake through the trees. He had built that house board by board, nail by nail, dream by dream, and my children had sold it to strangers without even telling me it was on the market. The grandfather clock in the corner, the one Teddy's father had brought over from England 70 years ago, chimed 9 times. I counted each one, letting the sound wash over me like cold water. By the 9th chime, I had made a decision. I was not going to confront them again. I was not going to scream or cry or beg for the money back. I was going to do what I had always done when faced with a problem too big to solve with emotion alone. I was going to think. I was going to plan. I was going to gather information. And then, when I knew everything I needed to know, I was going to act. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Margaret Chin, who had handled the firm's legal work for 2 decades and had become something like a friend over the years. I told her what had happened. I heard her sharp intake of breath when I mentioned the power of attorney. Scarlett, she said carefully, I need to see that document. Can you bring it to my office this afternoon? I couldn't bring it. I didn't have it. Vivian had taken the original after I signed it, and I had never thought to ask for a copy. Why would I? She was my daughter. I trusted her. I'll get it, I said. One way or another, I'll get it. That afternoon, I drove to Vivian's house. Her Mercedes was gone, which meant she was probably at one of her committees or charity boards, the activities that filled her days and made her feel important. Douglas's car was gone too. The children would be at school for another 2 hours. I had time. I still had a key. Vivian had given it to me years ago, back when we were still pretending to be the close family we never really were. In case of emergencies, she had said, pressing it into my palm. I never thought the emergency would be this. I never thought I would be letting myself into my daughter's home like a burglar, searching for evidence of my own betrayal. The house was immaculate, as always. Vivian had inherited my mother's obsession with cleanliness, the need to present a perfect surface to the world, no matter what chaos lurked beneath. I moved through the room silently, not touching anything, not leaving any trace of my presence. I knew what I was looking for. Vivian kept all her important documents in the study, in the antique desk that had belonged to Teddy's mother. The irony was not lost on me. The power of attorney was in the third drawer, in a folder labeled Mother's Affairs. I photographed every page with my phone, my hands steady, my breathing controlled. There were other documents in the folder too. Bank statements showing the wire transfer from the house sale, a real estate listing I had never seen, emails between Vivian and a realtor named Kevin something, discussing price points and marketing strategies and the best way to stage a property for quick sale. The emails dated back 14 months. 14 months. My daughter had been planning this for over a year. But that wasn't the worst thing I found. In the back of the drawer, behind the folder, was another envelope. This one was older, the paper yellowed with age, the edges soft from handling. I almost didn't open it. Something in me knew, the way you sometimes know things before you know them, that whatever was inside would change everything. I opened it anyway. It was a letter, handwritten in Teddy's familiar script, the letters small and precise, the way he always wrote. The date at the top was November 17, 2015, 3 months before he died. My dearest Cordy, if you're reading this, then something has happened that we didn't anticipate. I've written this letter as a kind of insurance policy, though I hope you'll never need to use it. I want you to know the truth about our children, in case I'm not there to tell you myself. I didn't build the Vermont house to get away from you. I built it because I wanted to give you something that couldn't be taken away, something real and solid and permanent. But I also built it because I was worried about what would happen to you after I was gone, worried about Vivian and Nathaniel, worried about the way they looked at you sometimes when they thought no one was watching. I never told you this, but 5 years ago, Nathaniel asked me for money, a lot of money. $200,000 for an investment that was guaranteed to triple within a year. I said no. I said if he wanted money, he should work for it the way we did. He didn't speak to me for 6 months after that. And when he finally called again, there was something different in his voice, something cold. Vivian has asked me twice to add her name to the deed of the Vermont house. She says it's for estate planning purposes. But I've seen the way she talks about that house, like it's already hers, like she's just waiting for us to die so she can cash in. I told her no both times. The second time she cried. She said I didn't trust her. She said I had always loved you more than I loved my own children. I didn't know what to say to that. Maybe she's right. Maybe I do love you more. Is that wrong? After 40 years, you're still the first person I think about when I wake up, and the last person I think about before I sleep. Our children grew up and became strangers. You stayed. I'm writing this letter because I want you to be careful after I'm gone. I've put the Vermont house in your name alone, with the provision that it cannot be sold without your explicit written consent. I've told our lawyer, Patricia Hendricks, about my concerns. She has copies of all the relevant documents. If anything strange happens with the property, if you sign anything you don't understand or don't remember signing, go to Patricia. She'll help you. I hope I'm wrong about all of this. I hope Vivian and Nathaniel are good children who love their mother and would never hurt her. But just in case I'm right, I wanted you to have this letter. I wanted you to know that I saw what was coming, even if I couldn't stop it. I love you, Cordy. I have loved you since the day we met at your cousin's wedding, when you spilled champagne on my best suit and then offered to pay for the dry cleaning with such genuine distress that I knew immediately you were the most honest person I had ever met. I have loved you through 40 years of marriage, 3 children, 2 miscarriages, 1 bankruptcy, and countless ordinary days that added up to an extraordinary life. Whatever happens after I'm gone, remember that. Remember that you were loved completely by someone who knew exactly who you were. Yours always, Teddy. I sat on the floor of my daughter's study, holding my dead husband's letter, and I wept. Not for the house, not for the money, not even for the betrayal, though that cut deep. I wept because Teddy had known. He had seen our children clearly, without the fog of maternal love that had blinded me for so many years. He had tried to protect me. He had written a letter, hired a lawyer, put provisions in place. And still, somehow, Vivian had found a way around all of it. She had used a power of attorney signed in a hospital bed to override her father's explicit wishes. She had sold the house he built, the house he meant for me and me alone. And she had done it while I was still alive to feel the loss. I dried my eyes, I photographed the letter, I put everything back exactly where I had found it, and then I left my daughter's house for what I knew would be the last time. That evening, I called Patricia Hendricks. She was retired now, living in Florida, but she remembered Teddy, and she remembered me, and she remembered the day he came to her office with a folder full of documents and a look of profound sadness on his face. He said he hoped he was wrong, Patricia told me over the phone, her voice cracked with age but still sharp, still precise. He said he wanted to believe his children were better than he feared, but he made me promise to help you if anything happened. He made me promise twice. Can they be prosecuted? I asked. What they did with the power of attorney, using it when I wasn't actually incapacitated, is that fraud? Patricia sighed. It's complicated, Scarlett. The language in most powers of attorney is broad enough to give the agent a lot of discretion. Proving that Vivian acted against your wishes when you gave her the authority to act on your behalf would be difficult. Not impossible, but difficult, and expensive, and emotionally devastating. I don't care about the money, I said. I don't even care about the house anymore. What I care about is the truth. What I care about is making sure my grandchildren understand what their mother did. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Be careful, Scarlett. Revenge can feel righteous, but it rarely feels good in the end. I'm not looking for revenge, I said. I'm looking for justice. There's a difference. Is there? Patricia asked softly. I've been a lawyer for 40 years, and I'm still not sure. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Teddy's chair, holding his letter, reading it over and over until I had memorized every word. I thought about my children as babies, as toddlers, as awkward teenagers, as young adults striking out into the world. I thought about all the moments I must have missed, all the signs I must have ignored, all the small betrayals that had led to this large one. I thought about Teddy, watching our children grow into people he didn't recognize, writing a letter he hoped I would never have to read. By dawn, I had a plan. 3 weeks passed. I didn't call Vivian. I didn't call Nathaniel. I sent birthday cards to my grandchildren with checks inside, the same as I always did, because they were not responsible for their mother's choices, and I refused to punish them for sins they hadn't committed. I went to my book club. I had lunch with friends. I volunteered at the library, reading stories to children who reminded me of Penelope and Theodore Jr. when they were small, before everything went wrong. And quietly, invisibly, I began to dismantle the illusion of the perfect family my children had constructed. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who came highly recommended by Patricia Hendricks. I gave him everything I had, the photographs of the documents, the letter, the timeline of the sale. I asked him to find out everything he could about my children's finances, not because I wanted to sue them, because I wanted to understand. I wanted to know how deep the rot went. What he found was worse than I had imagined. Nathaniel's tech startup in San Diego was actually a gambling operation, not a legal one. He was running an underground poker room in the back of a restaurant, taking a cut of every pot, bribing local officials to look the other way. His share of the house sale, all $185,000, was gone within 6 months. He was now in debt to people who didn't send polite collection notices. He was in danger, real danger, and he hadn't told anyone. Vivian's situation was more subtle, but no less troubling. The $93,000 in credit card debt was just the tip of the iceberg. She had been siphoning money from Douglas's business accounts for years, covering her tracks with creative bookkeeping that her husband, who trusted her completely, had never thought to question. The European vacations, the designer clothes, the private school tuition, all of it was built on theft. She was stealing from her own husband to maintain the appearance of a life they couldn't afford. And there was more. Marcus found evidence that Vivian had been in contact with a nursing home in New Hampshire, inquiring about their rates and availability. She had asked specific questions about patients with dementia, about how much control family members had over their finances, about how long the average patient lived after admission. The emails were dated 2 months before she asked me to sign the power of attorney. My daughter had been planning to put me in a home, not because I needed care, but because with me out of the way, she could control everything. The house in Vermont had just been the beginning. I sat in my living room reading Marcus's report, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not anger, not grief, something colder, something cleaner, a kind of clarity that comes only when every illusion has been stripped away, and you see the truth with perfect, terrible precision. My children were not good people. They had never been good people. The love I had given them, the sacrifices I had made, the years I had devoted to their happiness, all of it had been received as their due, as something they deserved simply for existing. They had never learned to give, only to take. And now they were taking everything they could, as fast as they could, before I ran out of things to steal. I thought about what Teddy would want me to do. I could almost hear his voice, soft and steady in my ear. Don't let them win, Cordy, but don't destroy yourself trying to beat them either. I wasn't going to destroy myself. I was going to do something much more elegant than that. I was going to tell the truth. Let me ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much that their betrayal felt like a physical wound? Like someone had reached into your chest and torn out something vital? Have you ever looked at your own child and wondered how they became a stranger wearing a familiar face? If you have, then you know what I was feeling in those weeks after I discovered the extent of my children's deception. And if you haven't, I hope you never do. I began with small steps. I revoked the power of attorney, filing the proper paperwork with Margaret Chen's help, making sure there was a clear legal record that Vivian no longer had any authority over my affairs. I changed all my passwords, all my account numbers, everything that could be accessed electronically. I had my will rewritten, removing Vivian and Nathaniel as beneficiaries and creating a trust for my grandchildren that neither of their parents could touch until Penelope and Theodore Jr. turned 30. Then I started making phone calls. The first call was to Douglas, Vivian's husband. I invited him to lunch at a restaurant downtown, somewhere neutral, somewhere public. He was surprised by the invitation but agreed, probably thinking I wanted to apologize for the scene in my kitchen, probably expecting me to smooth things over the way mothers-in-law were supposed to do. He arrived exactly on time, looking polished and professional in his pharmaceutical sales uniform of khaki pants and blue blazer. I had always liked Douglas. He was a simple man in the best sense of the word, uncomplicated, honest, devoted to his family. He had no idea his wife was stealing from him. He had no idea his mother-in-law was about to change his life. "Scarlett," he said, kissing my cheek as he slid into the booth across from me. "It's good to see you. Vivian's been worried about you." "Has she?" I kept my voice pleasant, my expression warm. "That's kind of her." We ordered. We made small talk. I asked about his work, about the children, about the new house next door that was finally finished after 18 months of construction noise. I let him relax. I let him think this was just a family lunch, a chance to reconnect. Then, over coffee, I showed him the report. I watched his face as he read. I watched the confusion first, the disbelief, the slow dawning horror as he realized what his wife had been doing. I watched something break behind his eyes, and I felt a moment of genuine sorrow for him. He was a collateral victim in all of this, an innocent man caught in the blast radius of my daughter's greed. "This can't be right," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "Vivian wouldn't. She's always been so careful with money. She handles all our finances. She's better at it than I am." "She's been handling them, yes," I said gently, "but not in the way you thought." He looked at me, and I saw the same expression I had seen in my own mirror 3 weeks ago. The look of someone whose entire understanding of their life was crumbling. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Because my grandchildren deserve a father who can make informed decisions about their future. And because I need you to understand that I'm not doing this to hurt Vivian. I'm doing this to stop her from hurting everyone else." Douglas sat with the report for a long time. He asked questions. I answered them as honestly as I could. I told him about the house sale, about the power of attorney, about the nursing home emails. I told him everything except the letter from Teddy. That was mine alone, my husband's final gift to me, and I wasn't ready to share it with anyone. "What are you going to do?" Douglas asked finally. "That depends partly on what you're going to do." He was quiet for another long moment. Then he straightened his shoulders, the way people do when they're accepting a burden they didn't ask for, but know they have to carry. "I'm going to talk to a lawyer," he said. "Not for divorce, not yet, but to understand my options, to protect the kids. And then I'm going to have a conversation with Vivian that's been a long time coming." I nodded. "I think that's wise. Scarlett," he reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was warm and firm, and I remembered suddenly why Vivian had married him, all those years ago, when she still seemed like the daughter I thought I knew. "I'm sorry for all of this. I should have seen what was happening." "We all should have," I said. "We all chose not to." We parted ways in the parking lot. I watched Douglas walk to his car, his shoulders bowed, his steps slower than when he had arrived. I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his marriage. But sometimes destruction is necessary. Sometimes you have to tear down a rotten structure before you can build something solid in its place. My next call was to San Diego. Nathaniel answered on the fourth ring, his voice wary, defensive. We hadn't spoken since before the house sale, and I knew Vivian must have told him about our confrontation. He was expecting an attack. He was expecting tears and recriminations and the familiar cycle of guilt and manipulation that had defined our relationship for so many years. He wasn't expecting what I actually said. "I know about the poker room, Nathaniel. I know about your debts. I know you're in over your head with people who don't negotiate." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, "How? That doesn't matter. What matters is that you need to get out. And I'm going to help you, but only if you're completely honest with me." More silence. I could hear him breathing, quick and shallow, the way he used to breathe when he was a little boy having nightmares. For all his flaws, for all the ways he had disappointed me, he was still my son. I still remembered holding him in the hospital, counting his tiny fingers and toes, feeling my heart crack open with a love so vast it frightened me. "Why would you help me?" he asked. "After what Vivian and I did?" "Because you're my son, because your father would have wanted me to, and because I believe, despite everything, that there's still something worth saving in you. But I need the truth, Nathaniel. All of it. No more lies," he told me. Over the next hour, he told me everything. His voice sometimes steady, sometimes breaking, sometimes dropping to a whisper as if he were afraid the walls were listening. He told me about the gambling addiction that had started in college and never really stopped. He told me about the series of failed businesses, each one a different shade of desperate. He told me about the men he owed money to, dangerous men, men who had already sent warning messages in the form of broken windows and threatening notes. He told me about the night he had called Vivian in tears, begging her to help him, and how she had said the only way to get that kind of money was to sell the Vermont house. It was her idea, he said, and I heard the childlike hope in his voice, the hope that shifting blame would somehow make him less guilty. "She said you didn't even use it anymore. She said you probably wouldn't even notice it was gone." "I noticed," I said. "I know. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I just kept thinking I could fix it. I kept thinking the next card would be different, the next bet would pay off, and I could put everything back the way it was before." "That's what gamblers always think," I said. "That's why they keep gambling." "What do I do now?" His voice was very small, very young. "What can I do?" I told him. I laid out a plan I had been forming since Marcus Webb's report landed on my kitchen table. I would pay off his debts, all of them, every penny. I would pay for treatment at a facility that specialized in gambling addiction, a 6-month residential program that Patricia Hendricks had recommended. But in exchange, he would sign a legal agreement acknowledging his role in the house sale. He would write a letter to Douglas, confessing everything he knew about Vivian's involvement. And he would stay away from me, from Vivian, from everyone in the family, until he had completed treatment and proven that he could maintain his recovery. "That's harsh," he said. "That's reality," I replied. "You're 39 years old, Nathaniel. You spent your entire adult life running from responsibility, expecting other people to clean up your messes, believing that love means never having to face consequences. I should have stopped enabling you years ago. Your father tried to tell me, but I didn't listen. I thought if I just loved you enough, if I just gave you enough chances, you would eventually become the person I wanted you to be. I was wrong. Love isn't enough. You have to want to change. You have to do the work yourself. All I can do is give you the opportunity." He was crying now. I could hear it in his breathing, in the wet catches of his voice. "And if I don't? If I say no? Then I'll have Marcus Webb send his report to the San Diego Police Department. The gambling operation will be shut down. You'll be arrested, and the men you owe money to will have to find another way to collect." "You wouldn't." "I would. Because prison is safer than what they'll do to you if they think you've become a liability. And because sometimes the only way to save someone you love is to make the hard choice they're too weak to make for themselves." He agreed. Of course he agreed. He had no other options left. 6 weeks later, Nathaniel checked into the Sunrise Recovery Center in Arizona. I drove him to the airport myself, helped him carry his single suitcase to the check-in counter, watched him disappear through security with the uncertain gait of a man walking into the unknown. At the gate, he turned back and raised one hand, not quite a wave, more like an acknowledgement of something too complicated for words. I raised my hand in return. Then he was gone. I haven't seen him since. I get weekly reports from his counselors. They say he's making progress. They say he started to understand the patterns that led him here, They say he talks about his father often, about the things he wishes he had said, the things he wishes he had been. I don't know if he'll make it. I don't know if 6 months of treatment can undo a lifetime of running away. But I gave him the chance. That's all I can do. Vivian was a different story. Douglas confronted her 3 days after our lunch. The conversation did not go well. There was screaming, there were accusations, there was a vase thrown against a wall. Penelope called me that night, sobbing, asking what was happening. Why were her parents fighting? Why wouldn't anyone tell her the truth? Sometimes, I told her, my heart breaking for my granddaughter caught in the crossfire. Adults make mistakes, big mistakes that hurt the people they love. When that happens, the only way to fix things is to be honest about what went wrong. Your parents are being honest with each other right now. It's painful, it's scary, but it's the first step towards something better. Is it going to get better, Grandma? Promise me it's going to get better. I couldn't promise her that. I couldn't lie to her the way her mother had lied to everyone. I promised that whatever happens, I will always be here for you and Theodore. I promise that you will always have a place in my home and in my heart. And I promise that the truth, even when it hurts, is always better than a comfortable lie. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice that sounded older than 14, she said, I think I already knew that. I think I've known for a long time that something was wrong. I just didn't want to see it. None of us did, sweetheart. None of us did. Douglas filed for divorce 2 weeks later. The proceedings were complicated by the financial entanglement of Vivian's embezzlement, by the joint assets that were harder to divide when one spouse had been stealing from the other, by the custody arrangements that had to balance the children's need for stability against Vivian's demonstrated untrustworthiness. Marcus Webb's report became evidence. Nathaniel's confession became evidence. The emails about nursing homes became evidence. Vivian fought back, of course. She hired lawyers, demanded mediation, threatened to expose family secrets if Douglas didn't back down. But Douglas had seen the truth now, and he couldn't unsee it. He fought for full custody. He fought for the house. He fought for the right to make financial decisions for the children without Vivian's involvement. And slowly, painfully, over the course of 8 months, he won. I testified at the custody hearing. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, sitting in that witness chair, answering questions about my own daughter, about the evidence of her deception, about my concerns for my grandchildren's welfare. Vivian's lawyer tried to paint me as a bitter old woman seeking revenge. I stayed calm. I stated the facts. I let the documents speak for themselves. When it was over, when the judge had ruled in Douglas's favor, and Vivian had walked out of the courtroom without looking at me, I sat in my car in the parking lot and allowed myself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. The house in Vermont, gone. My relationship with Vivian, gone. The illusion of a happy family, gone. Teddy, who would have known what to say, who would have held me while I cried, gone most of all. But my grandchildren were safe. Douglas had promised to maintain my relationship with them, to bring them for visits, to let them know that their grandmother loved them even when their mother couldn't be trusted. The money I had paid to rescue Nathaniel was an investment in his future, in the possibility that he might yet become a decent man. And the truth, the terrible, liberating truth, was finally out in the open, where it could no longer fester in the dark. Do you believe that time heals all wounds? Or do you think, like I do, that time simply teaches us how to carry them? A year has passed since Vivian stood in my kitchen and told me she had sold my husband's last gift. A year of legal proceedings and family upheaval, and long nights spent sitting in Teddy's chair, holding his letter, talking to him as if he could still hear me. My life looks different now, quieter, smaller in some ways, larger in others. I sold the house in Boston, the one that held too many memories of the family I thought I had, and bought a small cottage near the coast in Maine. It's nothing like the house in Vermont, the house Teddy built, but it has trees and water and the sound of nothing but birds. It has the peace I was looking for all along. Douglas brings the children to visit once a month. Penelope is 15 now, sharp and observant, asking questions about her mother that I answer as honestly as I can without adding to the burden she already carries. Theodore Jr. is 12, quieter than he used to be, more thoughtful. He reminds me of Teddy sometimes, the way he watches everything with those careful eyes, taking in more than he lets on. Last month, Theodore asked me about his grandfather. He wanted to know what kind of man Teddy had been, what he had cared about, what he had believed in. I told him about the house in Vermont. I told him about the sawdust in Teddy's hair and the plans spread across the kitchen table. I told him that his grandfather had been a man who believed in building things, in leaving the world a little better than he found it, in love that expressed itself through action rather than words. "Why did Mom sell it?" Theodore asked. "The house Grandpa built?" I took a breath. I had been dreading this question, preparing for it, uncertain how to answer. "Your mother made a mistake," I said finally. "A big mistake, the kind that can't be undone. She thought the house was something she could own, something she deserved because she was family. But the house was never about ownership. It was about love. About the time your grandfather spent building something with his own hands for someone he cared about. Your mother forgot that, or maybe she never understood it in the first place." Theodore was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I want to build things when I grow up, like Grandpa did." I hugged him then, hugged him tight enough to feel his heart beating against my chest. And I thought about the letter Teddy had written all those years ago. I thought about his words. I hope I'm wrong about all of this. I hope Vivian and Nathaniel are good children who love their mother and would never hurt her. He had been wrong about Vivian, wrong about Nathaniel. But maybe he would have been right about Theodore, about this quiet, thoughtful boy who wanted to build things like his grandfather, who carried Teddy's name and maybe, just maybe, carried some of his character too. That night, after Douglas took the children home, I sat on my porch and watched the sun set over the water. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and gold, the kind of sunset that makes you feel small and large at the same time, connected to something vast and ancient and beautiful. I thought about justice, about revenge, about the fine line between them that Patricia Hendricks had asked me about all those months ago. I had wanted my children to face consequences for what they had done. I had wanted them to understand that actions have weight, that betrayal has a cost, that you cannot steal someone's life and expect them to simply accept the loss. But I had also wanted something else, something harder to name. I had wanted them to become better. I had wanted the truth to transform them the way it had transformed me. I had wanted to believe that love, real love, the kind that survives disappointment and forgives without forgetting, could still repair what had been broken. Nathaniel was trying. His counselor said he was trying, and I chose to believe them, because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. He had 6 more weeks of treatment before he could leave the facility, before he would have to face the world again with new tools and old temptations, and the uncertain knowledge that recovery is a choice you have to make every single day. Vivian was not trying. The last I heard, she had moved to Miami, was dating a man 20 years younger, was posting photos on social media of a glamorous life that probably existed only in carefully curated snapshots. She didn't call. She didn't write. She had cut me out of her life as cleanly as she had cut the Vermont house out of my possession, as if I were an inconvenience she no longer needed to manage. I mourned her. Not the woman she had become, but the daughter I thought she was. The little girl who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read her stories. The teenager who shared her secrets with me, or at least some of them, the ones she thought I could handle. The young woman who stood at my side when Teddy was lowered into the ground, holding my hand, promising she would always be there. That Vivian was gone now, if she had ever really existed. And I had to find a way to live with the loss of someone who wasn't dead, who was walking around somewhere in the world wearing my daughter's face, but nothing else that I recognized. The sky darkened. The first stars appeared. I stayed on the porch, wrapped in a blanket that Teddy had bought for me years ago at a craft fair in Vermont, listening to the waves and the wind and the silence between them. I was 69 years old. I had buried my husband. I had lost both my children, one to addiction and one to something darker, something that might not have a name. I had spent my savings rescuing a son who might never fully recover. I had testified against my own daughter in a court of law. I had done things I never imagined I would do, felt things I never imagined I would feel, become someone I barely recognized in the mirror. And yet, there was peace now. There was clarity. There was the knowledge that I had done what needed to be done, not out of revenge, not out of spite, but out of the hard, clear love that sometimes looks like cruelty, but is actually the opposite. I had loved my children enough to tell them the truth. I had loved my grandchildren enough to protect them from their own parents. I had loved Teddy enough to honor his memory, to keep his letter close to my heart, to visit his grave every month and tell him everything that had happened since he left. The wind picked up. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Tomorrow, I would drive to the cemetery and put flowers on Teddy's grave. I would tell him about Theodore's question, about the boy who wanted to build things like his grandfather. I would tell him that his letter had saved me, had given me the courage to see our children clearly and act accordingly. I would tell him that I missed him every day, every hour, every minute, but that I was okay. I was more than okay. I was exactly where I needed to be. They took everything from me: my house, my money, my trust, my belief in the family I thought I had built. They took it all, and for a while I thought I had nothing left. But I was wrong. I still had the truth. I still had my grandchildren. I still had the memory of a man who loved me enough to write a letter he hoped I would never have to read. I still had the strength to survive what would have destroyed a lesser person. And I still had myself, Scarlett Ashworth, 69 years old, accountant, widow, mother, grandmother, survivor. That was enough. That was more than enough. The stars wheeled overhead, the waves whispered against the shore, and somewhere in the darkness, I could almost hear Teddy's voice, soft and warm and full of love. You did good, Cordy. You did real good. I smiled. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, I slept without dreaming of everything I had lost. 6 months after that quiet night on the porch, I received a phone call that changed everything again. It was from the Sunrise Recovery Center in Arizona. Nathaniel had completed his treatment. He had done well, they said. He had engaged with the program, attended every session, been honest about his struggles. He had earned privileges by helping other patients, by becoming someone the counselors relied on to model the behavior they wanted to see. He was ready to leave, but he had a request. He didn't want me to pick him up. He wanted to come to Maine, to see my new house, to start fresh in a place that held no memories of his failures. He wanted a chance to show me who he had become. I said yes, because that's what mothers do. Because despite everything, despite the house and the money and the betrayal, he was still my son. Because Teddy would have wanted me to give him one more chance. He arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon in October. The leaves had begun to turn, painting the hills behind my cottage in shades of red and gold. I watched him walk up the path from the taxi, his suitcase in his hand, his shoulders straight in a way I hadn't seen since he was a young man full of possibilities. He looked older, thinner. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his hair had started to gray at the temples. But there was something else too, something in the way he carried himself, a steadiness that had been missing for as long as I could remember. "Mom," he said when he reached the porch. Just that one word, but the way he said it, the weight of it, the history and the hope and the uncertainty told me everything I needed to know about where he had been and how far he had come. "Nathaniel," I stepped forward and hugged him. He stiffened at first, unused to physical affection after so many years of keeping everyone at arm's length. Then he relaxed into it, and I felt his shoulders shake with the effort of not crying. We stood there for a long time, mother and son, on the porch of a house he had never seen before, in a state he had never visited, starting over in the way that broken families sometimes get to do if they're lucky, if they're willing, if they're brave enough to try. That night, we sat in my small living room, drinking tea, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about the treatment program, about the people he had met there, about the moment when he finally understood that gambling wasn't about money at all. It was about escaping, about avoiding the feelings he couldn't face, about the rush of risk that made him feel alive because the rest of his life felt so unbearably dead. "Dad knew," he said quietly. "Didn't he? He knew what I was." "He saw things," I admitted, "things I didn't want to see. That's why he said no when I asked for the money. That's why he never added Vivian to the house deed." Nathaniel stared into his tea as if the answers were written in the steam. "He was protecting you, both times, and I hated him for it." "Did you?" "Yes, for years. I told myself he was controlling, that he didn't understand, that he was the reason I couldn't get ahead. It was easier than admitting that he was right, that everything he said about me was true." I reached across and took his hand. His fingers were thinner than they used to be, the nails bitten down to the quick, but his grip was strong. "Your father loved you, Nathaniel, even when he couldn't help you, even when he had to say no. He loved you exactly the way you were." "How do you know?" "Because I read his letter, the one he wrote before he died. He talked about you, about his fears for your future, but he also talked about hope, about the possibility that you might still become the man he believed you could be." I squeezed his hand. "He never gave up on you. Neither did I." The weeks that followed were delicate, careful, like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. Nathaniel stayed in my spare bedroom, helped with the cooking and cleaning, took long walks along the shore. He went to support meetings in the nearest town, 45 minutes away, driving there 3 times a week in my old Honda without complaint. He talked to his counselor by video call every Tuesday and Thursday. He read books about addiction and recovery and the brain science behind compulsive behavior. He started journaling, filling notebook after notebook with his thoughts, his feelings, the memories he had spent his whole life trying to escape. And slowly, gradually, something began to heal. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment of breakthrough, no tearful confession that resolved everything. It was more like watching a garden recover from a harsh winter, small green shoots pushing through the dead leaves, color returning to the world, one tiny increment at a time. By Christmas, Nathaniel felt strong enough to see Douglas and the children. I hosted dinner at my cottage, my first real holiday gathering since Teddy died. The house was too small for a proper party, but that made it more intimate, more real. We crowded around my tiny dining table, passing dishes, telling stories, laughing at things that weren't even that funny but felt hilarious because we needed to laugh. Penelope had grown 3 inches since I saw her last. She was 16 now, a junior in high school, talking about colleges and careers and the future with an intensity that reminded me of myself at her age. Theodore was 13, gangly and awkward and beautiful, still carrying his grandfather's name like a promise he intended to keep. They hugged their uncle carefully, uncertain how to act around someone who had been absent for so long. But Nathaniel was patient with them. He asked questions about their lives, really listened to the answers, remembered details from earlier conversations. He was learning, I realized, how to be present, how to show up for people, how to exist in someone else's life instead of just his own. After dinner, while Douglas and the children were washing dishes and arguing about which Christmas movie to watch, Nathaniel and I stepped out onto the porch. The night was cold, clear, the stars brilliant against the black sky. Our breath made clouds in the frozen air. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me another chance, for not giving up when everyone else would have." "Thank your father," I said. "His letter is the reason I knew what to do. I was lost before I found it. I was ready to let you both destroy yourselves and call it love." "Have you heard from Vivian?" I shook my head. I hadn't spoken to my daughter in over a year. I knew she was still in Miami, still posting photos of a life that looked expensive and empty. I knew she had tried to contest the divorce settlement, then the custody arrangement, then the civil suit Douglas had filed to recover the money she stole. She lost every time. The legal fees alone must have been devastating. Sometimes I wondered if she thought about me, if she missed me the way I missed her, if she ever looked at photos from our past and wondered how everything went so wrong. But then I remembered the coldness in her eyes when she told me about the house, the casual cruelty of her words, and I knew that whatever I was missing, it wasn't her. It was the idea of her, the daughter I wanted her to be rather than the daughter she actually was. "Do you think she'll ever change?" Nathaniel asked. "I don't know. I hope so. But hope isn't the same as belief." We stood in silence for a while, listening to the laughter from inside the house, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Then Nathaniel spoke again, his voice soft but clear. "I want to make amends, not just to you, not just to Douglas and the kids, to everyone I hurt. There's a step in the program about that, about acknowledging the harm you've caused and trying to repair it. I've been putting it off because I'm scared, but I think it's time." "What kind of amends?" "I don't know yet. That's part of the process, figuring out what I can actually do, what people actually need. Some of the damage can't be undone. I can't give you back the house Dad built. I can't erase the years I wasted. But maybe I can do something. Maybe I can help someone else. Maybe I can use what I learned to keep other people from making the same mistakes." I thought about that, about the power of transformed pain, the way suffering can become wisdom if you're willing to do the work. About Teddy, who spent 3 years building a house with his own hands because he wanted to give me something permanent, something real. "You know what your father always said," I told Nathaniel. "The best way to fix the past is to build a better future." He nodded slowly. I think I finally understand what he meant. 3 months later, Nathaniel moved into his own apartment in Portland. He got a job at a nonprofit that helped people with gambling addiction, using his story to reach people who thought they were beyond help. He went to meetings every day, sometimes twice a day, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because being around others who understood his struggle made the burden easier to carry. He visited me every Sunday for dinner. We talked about his work, about his recovery, about the small victories and setbacks that made up a life lived one day at a time. He started seeing a woman named Rachel, a teacher who had lost her brother to addiction and understood what it meant to love someone while holding them accountable. She was kind but firm, gentle but honest, exactly what Nathaniel needed. I watched my son become, slowly and imperfectly, the man his father hoped he could be. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were hard days, days when the old cravings came back, days when he called me in tears because someone he was trying to help had relapsed and died. But he kept going. He kept showing up. He kept doing the work. That was more than I had ever dared to hope for. Penelope graduated from high school. She was accepted to 3 universities and chose the one farthest from Miami, where she knew her mother was living. Theodore joined a carpentry club at his school and started building birdhouses, then benches, then a treehouse in Douglas's backyard that looked like something Teddy might have designed. They visited me regularly, filling my small cottage with noise and energy and life. I turned 70, then 71. The years passed the way years do when you're no longer counting them, when you've stopped waiting for something to happen and started accepting what is. My body slowed down. My joints ached in cold weather. Some mornings I struggled to get out of bed, to remember why getting up mattered at all. But then Nathaniel would call, or Douglas would send a photo of Theodore's latest project, or Penelope would text me a question about life that I didn't know how to answer, but tried to anyway. And I would remember. I would remember that getting up mattered because the people I loved were still here, still needing me, still giving me reasons to keep going. Last week, Nathaniel brought Rachel to meet me. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon with wine and flowers and nervous smiles. Over dinner, Rachel told me about her brother, about the years of hoping and losing hope and hoping again, about the call that came one Christmas morning when she was 19 and changed everything. She understood my family's story because she had lived a version of it herself. After dinner, Nathaniel pulled me aside. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with something I hadn't seen there in years. Happiness, maybe, or hope, or the absence of fear. "I'm going to ask her to marry me," he said. "Not yet, not until I'm sure I'm ready, but someday, soon. I wanted you to know first." I hugged him. I held on for a long time, feeling his heart beat against my chest, remembering the baby I had held in the hospital all those years ago, the troubled boy, the lost young man, the damaged, middle-aged stranger who had finally found his way home. "Your father would be proud," I whispered. "I'm proud. You've done something harder than building a house, or running a business, or any of the things people usually call success. You've built yourself. That takes more courage than anything." He pulled back, wiped his eyes, laughed the way people do when they're embarrassed to be crying and don't know what else to do. "Thanks, Mom, for everything, for not giving up." "Thank your father," I said again. "His letter saved us both." That night, after Nathaniel and Rachel left, I sat on my porch with Teddy's letter in my hands. The paper was worn now, soft from handling, the ink fading slightly at the edges. I had read it so many times I could recite it from memory, but I still liked to hold it, to feel the physical presence of his words, the connection to a man who had loved me enough to try to protect me even after he was gone. The stars were bright overhead, the waves whispered against the shore, and somewhere in the darkness I could feel him. Not his ghost, not his spirit, but his presence, woven into the fabric of everything I had become, everything I had done, everything that mattered. "We made it, Teddy," I said quietly. "Not all of us, not the way we hoped. But Nathaniel found his way back. The grandchildren are growing up strong. And I learned something important. I learned that love isn't about protecting people from consequences. It's about giving them the chance to face them and grow." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and autumn leaves. I pulled my blanket tighter and closed my eyes. They took everything from me. My children, my trust, my belief in the family I thought I had built. They took it all, and for a while, I thought I had nothing left. But here's what they couldn't take. They couldn't take the truth. They couldn't take my strength. They couldn't take the love of a man who saw the future clearly and tried to prepare me for it. They couldn't take my grandchildren's potential, or my son's capacity for change, or my own stubborn refusal to give up on the people who were willing to earn redemption. They took everything. And yet somehow, impossibly, I ended up with more than I started with. That is the nature of justice. Real justice. Not revenge, not punishment, not the satisfaction of seeing your enemies suffer. Real justice is watching the truth set everyone free, the guilty and the innocent alike. Real justice is building something beautiful from the wreckage of what was destroyed. Real justice is learning, at 69 and 70 and 71 years old, that you are stronger than you ever imagined, more resilient than you ever believed, more capable of love and forgiveness and hard, clear-eyed truth than you ever thought possible. They took everything from me, and still, in the end, I won. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about family, about truth, about the hard choices we sometimes have to make, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is not forgiveness. Sometimes the greatest act of love is telling the truth, even when it costs you everything you thought you knew. Scarlett.